Hi, I'm Bob McCoskrie. Welcome to Family Matters. Miriam Grossman, MD, is a board-certified child, adolescent and adult psychiatrist. She writes and speaks internationally and is the author of You're Teaching My Child What? A physician exposes the lies of sex education and how they harm your child. That's 2009. And Unprotected, a campus psychiatrist reveals how political correctness in her profession endangers every student, 2006. And Dr. Grossman says that instead of teaching our children biological truths, sex educators are lying to them, ignoring science in favour of radical and dangerous social agendas. Now, Dr. Grossman is an old friend, visited New Zealand in 2012. She is also the author of a Family First report, R18, Sexuality Education in New Zealand, a critical review. And in that report, she demanded that groups such as Family Planning Association and Rainbow Youth be held accountable for sex education material that was seriously flawed. She said that students should be provided with the information and guidance they need. And this report was sent to all school principals and all Board of Trustees, chairpersons of intermediate and secondary schools in New Zealand. And she also made a guest appearance on Close Up as well. Miriam, it's lovely to have you back in New Zealand, albeit by Zoom, but it was 10 years ago we last saw you speaking at our conference. Welcome back to New Zealand.
Yes, well, I wish it wasn't virtual. I wish I was there in reality in your beautiful country. But it's great to be back in touch with you, and you're looking great, and I know you're doing a lot of good stuff over there.
Well, you keep saying that and I'll keep paying you. I like those compliments. Look, I wanted to catch up with you because you wrote a really important article for Daily Wire entitled How Do Gender Transitions Impact Children? Here's what the science say. And in New Zealand, we're not getting a lot of science. We're getting a lot of ideology, which is capturing the media and capturing the narrative, even capturing the government. So can we just go through in this short session we have together? Let's just start off. They talk about affirmation, that we need to affirm kids. What does that mean, and what's the problem with that kind of statement?
Okay. So affirmation means that when a child comes and announces to their family, to their school, that they have a new identity, a new gender identity, that the adults are supposed to unconditionally accept that identity without challenging and without, questioning. They're supposed to, for example, if the child comes, if a female child decides that her identity is male and she has picked out a male name, the affirming model would say that the adults in her life should automatically start using that new name, should use whatever pronouns she may pick. And now kids have a variety of pronouns that they choose from. Some of them are old-fashioned pronouns, and some of them are new pronouns that were never used before, words that were never used before. But basically, the affirming model would say from the beginning, parents and teachers and doctors and therapists must support the child because only the child knows what gender they are. And then moving on from there, affirmation therapy would say that that if the child is beginning puberty or in puberty, that it's time, to consider stopping and pausing, what they say, pausing puberty with puberty blockers, which are hormones that will interfere at the level of the brain with the process of puberty and all the things that go along with it. All the physical changes, the brain changes in the brain, the changes in the skeleton, growth. Puberty is a huge event in the development of a human being. And it's not just the reproductive organs that mature during puberty. It's practically every organ in the body, including the brain. So affirmation therapy calls for giving kids who have gender confusion puberty blockers so that they won't develop the sex characteristics that they might be uncomfortable with, breasts and facial hair and a lowered voice and so on and so forth. And the argument is that if puberty can be paused and the child is given more time to figure out who they are, then that's beneficial. But and they argue that these puberty blockers are reversible, fully reversible.
That's what they're arguing.
But there's a problem with those arguments. There's a problem with that. To begin with, they are not fully reversible. They definitely can cause changes, for example, in bone density, in children that may not be reversible. But more important than that, Bob, is that almost every child that goes on puberty blockers continues on to cross-sex hormones. So to say that the blockers are reversible really is not accurate. We don't have the data for that. The reason why they're saying that is they're looking at data from a different population of children. Okay, they're looking at the population of children who have a rare disorder called precocious puberty.
Right.
Precocious puberty is when kids who are 6 or 7 years old enter puberty much too early. And so we give them medication that will stop that process. And then when we remove the medication, when it is the proper time for puberty to start, yes, they do go through natural puberty, but that's not what we're talking about here.
So it seems
do you follow?
Yeah, exactly. So it seems like this look at it. It gives them a chance to think: do they really want to follow through this process? That's actually a smoke screen. It's actually the first stage of pushing the kid into transgenderism, isn't it?
Well, what we have to consider is that if you put a child on puberty blockers and you call them by their different name, their new name of the opposite sex, and different pronouns, and they're presenting to the world as the opposite sex in terms of their hair and their clothing, you have to consider what that does to the way the child thinks about themselves, and whether it might not be solidifying, whether that may be solidifying their identity, especially when the adults that they trust and love are all in it with them. Exactly. And they're all saying, they're saying, if you feel uncomfortable being a girl, then we can consider you a boy. And that's awfully hard. You need to be very brave to turn that around. The families that I know and that I've talked to, who have kids who have turned around and stopped identifying as transgender, they sometimes need to switch schools or move away because it's just too difficult for the child to come back to their friends and come back to school and say, you know what, I'm actually not a girl, I'm still a boy.
And that was one thing that I was going to ask you later on, but I'll bring it up now, is this whole, not only is the pressure coming from within the schools, but of course there's this peer pressure in what we call ROGD, the rapid onset gender dysphoria. Are you seeing that where it's becoming almost cool to be transgender? There's huge peer pressure now, huge cultural pressure.
Oh yes, it's very cool. When children announce that they're transgender, they are celebrated and they are congratulated. But what I want to say here is that, many of these kids have underlying emotional problems. And many of them have anxiety or they're on the autism spectrum, and they never felt like they fit in. And they never felt that they had a peer group. And suddenly, when they announce that they're transgender, everybody wants to be their friend. And everybody likes them. Yeah. And so there is just tremendous, positive attention that they get.
More affirmation.
Until they might change their minds. If they change their minds, then they don't get positive attention.
And then, of course, they go on possibly to the surgery. And I mean, we're talking about cutting off parts of the body, the chest binding as well. That's really radical, isn't it?
It's radical, but unfortunately, it's being normalized and it's being called healthcare. Now, you mentioned binding. Binding is a very important thing for parents to know about. Binding and tucking. So this is difficult to talk about, but binding is when girls want to flatten their chest. And so they buy these extremely restrictive elastic undergarments, and they wear them in order to look more masculine. The thing is that these binders can be dangerous. They can cause difficulty breathing. They can cause rashes, and even more serious conditions. And in terms of what the boys do something called tucking. And Bob, it's really
my eyes are watering just thinking about it.
I apologize, but I don't know what's going on in New Zealand, but here in the US, their hospitals, gender clinics are providing instructions to boys on how to do this. So what they do is they want to present like a flat appearance in their crotch. And so they put the penis between the legs, and then they actually try to take the testicles and to push them into, it's called the inguinal canal, which is, the testicles do not belong in the inguinal canal. This is going to be painful and dangerous. And it really is shocking that health professionals and mental health professionals are actually instructing boys to do this.
Yeah, it is. Now, it's interesting, though, because, let's just deal with, I think, what is the claim that makes a lot of people, conservatives, people that are really concerned and want to champion truth in biology, but we get this weapon thrown at us, and that is, if you don't affirm the child, they will commit suicide. How do you respond to that? Because, from the research I've read, post-transgender, the suicide rate doesn't change from pre-transgender. The surgery doesn't make a difference, and these kids are already troubled, and all they're doing is carrying that trouble through this whole process.
Yes. The way that I respond to that is by saying, of course, we have to help these kids, but we have to give them the real help that they need, which is to explore why they want to become a different person. Why do they want to run away from the person that they are, from their masculinity, from their femininity? Why do they believe the solution to their problems lies in becoming a totally different person? So, of course, they need our help. They need therapy. They need love, and they also need time. They need a lot of time to get older and to get through puberty and reach adulthood. Because we know that with the younger group of kids that have been studied, this older group of kids who are becoming transgender in adolescence is a new group. The ROGD group is a new group that really has not been studied very much at all. But the younger group of kids, the kids who become transgender in their early years of their life, we know that an average of 80% of them will, if they're allowed to go through normal puberty, they will become comfortable with their bodies. And so to answer your question about suicide, these kids are at greater risk of suicide, but not greater than many of the other groups of kids who have psychiatric disorders. And on top of that, as you said, that is correct. If we look at the long-term data, then, which there isn't much of, but there is long-term data that shows that the suicide rate continues to be very high, whether or not there is a medical transition. It continues to be high. And I'm worried about the kids who transition medically and their underlying problems are never dealt with. And then they're in their 20s and they're in their late 20s and they're realizing that they still have the same emotional problems that they did when they were younger. Plus, they're not fertile. They can't have a child or they can't nurse a child. They have difficulty finding a life partner. They may have sexual dysfunction because the hormones affect your sexual function, and certainly the surgeries do. So they end up with a whole new set of problems that they didn't have in the beginning.
I wonder whether we've started to reach a tipping point where we're starting to go back to common sense in biology. The Tavistock Clinic in the UK are reviewing it. There's European clinics that are. I know that groups in Australia and New Zealand are starting to say, hang on, this is more a psychiatric issue. You've got to do that assessment first. Apart from Biden in the White House, it seems like the world is starting to get to that point where they're realizing, hey, this whole experiment is a dangerous experiment and it's harming our kids. Would that be a fair summation of what's happening if you take out the current Biden administration approach?
Well, yeah, I mean, those countries, Sweden, the UK, Finland, France, there's a group of psychiatrists in Australia and New Zealand. They are all urging caution. They are all saying, wait a minute, we have to look at this much more closely, because after they examined the evidence, they realized that the evidence is insufficient and that it is experimental, and we can't be doing this in an experimental way. And so we need to be providing psychotherapy first, a lot of psychotherapy. That is not what's happening here in the US or in Canada, at least, in officially. But I do feel hopeful that at least some countries are, and those are the most progressive LGBT friendly countries as well.
Yeah, that's the interesting aspect of it. And I've always, is this a fair comparison? I look at young people who struggle with anorexia nervosa. There's a separation of the reality from the physical. They think they're fat, but they're actually skinny, and they're getting skinnier and they're getting sicker. And we don't offer them liposuction and weight loss pills and tell them to go on a diet. We heal the mind because we realize that there's a dysphoria between what is actually going on in the physical reality. But we don't seem to adopt that with gender ideology. It seems to have been taken captive by radicals who just want to, it feels like they just want to add to their population.
Well, I think it's might even be bigger than that. I think that there's a goal of basically trying to eliminate the male and female categories and to kind of create this new society where male and female is irrelevant and not connected to reproduction even.
Yeah. Look, we're just about out of time, but for parents who are watching this, they have one of their children come up to them and say that they want to change sex, they're identifying as a different gender at school, and the teacher's all good with that, the school's encouraging them, they want to start going on puberty blockers. You've dealt with a lot of families like this. What's your advice to parents facing this dilemma, especially when, for example, the grown-ups in the child's life, from the school maybe, or the medical professional, or even the child themselves says, if you don't do what I say, mum and dad, I'm going to commit suicide. I mean, for parents, what do they do?
Well, there's a lot really that they can do. And the first thing is to be informed. So I'm going to give you a few websites here. Mm-hmm. Okay, the first one is going to be my website, which is miriamgrossmanmd.com. Mm-hmm. And I've got articles and videos on there. Then I'm going to tell you about a organization that has all the incredible medical information that you need, the studies, and that is SEGM, and that stands for Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine. And the next one is partnersforethicalcare.com, partnersforethicalcare.com. There's an organization called GenSpect.
Yeah, we've done an interview with GenSpect, great organization. Yeah.
Okay, good. Did you have Stella?
Yes.
Stella O'Malley?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you know about that. And there's a fantastic school resource guide that you can download for free. And it has all the information that schools should have to deal with this issue.
Okay,
and that is on a website.
We've done a New Zealand version of that, so I will put that one up for our New Zealand viewers. But I know the one you're referring to. Yeah.
Oh, you do know that one? Yeah. Okay.
So some great resources, and that's really important. Just as a parent, though, I mean, you're a parent, a mum. What would you say to your child? For a parent who's facing this dilemma right now, how do they immediately tackle it, even before going to these websites?
Okay. We love you. We're always going to stay by your side. We need to learn a lot more about this. We're very curious to learn what it's like for you. And we're curious to learn what other people are saying about the kind of help that you can get. We might, you might go through some tough times, but we will always stay by your side. We're family. And even if we disagree, we're staying together on this.
Great advice. Miriam, we're just about out of time, but you came over to New Zealand 10 years ago and you called out sex educators because you said they weren't telling kids the truth. They were misrepresenting the effect of so-called safe sex. They were underplaying the harm of sexually transmitted infections. You really rocked the boat, and a lot of people were very annoyed with the resources that you wrote for us and the reports that we published, and we still continue those. But now we're on to not only the whole sex education, but we're on to gender education. I mean, do you sort of sit back and sort of say, what is going on here? Why are we so intent on confusing, stressing, and harming our kids?
Well, Bob, I wrote that book that you mentioned at the beginning, You're Teaching My Child What, which came out in 2009. I had a chapter in there about gender.
Right.
Okay. And that was really before it was on, most people's radar. And I said, look, kids are being told that sex and gender are completely separate things, and that biology doesn't matter, and that gender is fluid. And what is this? These are not good ideas. These are dangerous ideas for children. So I consider this to be part of the efforts by the left, the radical left, to change society in a drastic way, and to refute any sort of Judeo-Christian values that we have in our society. And let me also say, Bob, before I go, is that there's a ton of science refuting the idea that biology doesn't matter, because biology matters very, very much when it comes to being male or female.
Well, we'll encourage people to read your article in Daily Wire. I'll put that link up. And look, we're grateful for you beaming to us live. We're really grateful for your time, Miriam. And it's 10 years, so we're going to have to get you back physically in person in New Zealand. So we'll talk about that. But thank you for your time on Family Matters.
Thank you, Bob. Great to be with you.